Meet Turan, the embodiment of Batman. But instead of riches, he was born carrying the overwhelming godlike power of his too powerful parent. The story opens with a young boy declaring that he is a wizard. He plays with a girl who acts as a monster that eats wizards. Raising a wooden branch, he strikes her head. She yells in pain, asking why he hit her for real. He explains monsters are supposed to lose to wizards. Nearby, an elderly man watches them quietly. He remarks on how lively the children are this morning. The boy recognizes him as Rabus. Curious, he asks what it takes to become a wizard. Rabus explains it is not something you can become by wishing. He describes wizards as the peak of humanity, beings who stand at the highest social ranks, nobles and knights who inherited magic from their ancestors. He tells the children they cannot become wizards. A nearby villager interrupts the conversation, questioning the elder about a rumor. Rabus asks what he means. The man mentions a monster sighting. Rabus confirms the rumor is true. He explains a creature was seen at the entrance last night, a leopard covered in pitch-black shadows, the size of an entire house. He reassures the villagers not to panic. The chief has gone to the city to request a wizard, someone powerful enough to subjugate the beast. The girl's mother feels relieved hearing this. She warns her child not to enter the forest. Rabus cautions everyone to stay alert. Without a wizard, killing a monster is nearly impossible. A villager asks if everyone has been informed, then questions if a certain person knows. Rabus asks who he means. The man mentions the shepherd on Hizaril Hill. High above the village, Turan rests alone, looking at the sky in boredom, thinking about how dull life has become. He reflects on seeing the same view every day, wondering if he will forget how to speak. Rabus suddenly appears and calls him pathetic, complaining that he is already slacking off. Turan tells him to move since he blocks the sun. Rabus scolds him for lacking manners, asking if he still holds a grudge. Turan brings up his mother's death, accusing Rabus of trying to take the sheep. Rabus avoids the topic awkwardly. Turan confirms he still holds resentment, declaring he will not share his inheritance. He tells the old man to leave. Rabus shouts in frustration. Turan asks what he actually wants. Rabus explains the monster situation, describing the giant shadow leopard. Turan admits it is serious. Rabus notices Turan is not afraid. Despite being the most likely target, he warns him to be careful, mentioning the wizard will arrive soon. He claims he came out of concern, but Turan doubts his honesty, saying he cares more about the sheep. Turan insults him and tells him to leave. Rabus storms off angrily. Turan reflects on monsters and magic. Humans have wizards while beasts have monsters. He feels curious about seeing a wizard, wondering how strong they truly are. Suddenly, he smells something strange, a strong scent of blood. Following it into the forest, he tracks the source carefully until he suddenly stops. Looking down, he sees Rabus torn apart, his body ripped into pieces. Turan realizes the smell came from him. He notes this is no ordinary animal attack. It must be the monster. He senses something approaching. A massive paw lands nearby. The shadow beast reveals itself. The reports were true. Back in the village, the boy asks about monsters. His father explains they are incredibly powerful. Ordinary people would be destroyed instantly. The boy asks what will happen to them. His father reassures him about the wizard, saying they will defeat it easily. Back in the forest, the beast lunges at Turan. He calmly tells it to die. The monster hesitates and retreats. The creature snarls as Turan releases an aura. He questions why his power is not working fully. The beast attacks again. He commands it to stop. It hesitates once more but still continues attacking. Turan dodges smoothly. He realizes killing it directly will not work, so he changes his approach. Reaching into his coat, he pulls out a rock, saying a shepherd should act like one. The beast prepares another strike. Turan places the rock into a sling. His eyes glow gold. He commands the stone to harden, then to become faster. Swinging the sling forward, he tells it to pierce through. The stone launches at incredible speed, breaking through the air like a bullet. The monster barely dodges. Its ear is sliced cleanly. The stone flies past into the distance. The beast charges for a final attack, aiming for his head. Suddenly, the stone stops mid-air. It turns and flies back, striking the back of the monster's skull, blowing it apart instantly. The beast collapses lifeless. Turan stands over the corpse calmly, noting it is his first time using this move on a monster. He wonders what to do with the body, complaining about the trouble caused. Then the truth is revealed. Turan is a wizard. He discovered his power 8 years ago, when he was just a child. He made objects float and called his mother excitedly, showing her fire and wind, but she screamed for him to stop. The first and last time she was angry, she called him over to talk, asking if he wanted to live long. He answered yes. She made him promise never to use magic openly, warning him never to reveal it. She explained the difference between nobles and knights. Nobles descended from divine beings, knights from mixed bloodlines, both still considered wizards. She warned him about cruel nobles who treat others like slaves, telling him to keep his power hidden. 8 years pass since that promise. Turan continues to hide his identity. He has no desire to reveal himself or leave the mountain. Suddenly, loud knocking interrupts him. Villagers shout for him to come out. He steps outside calmly. They accuse him of killing Rabus, grabbing him aggressively. They call him shameless and accuse him, claiming he let Rabus die. Turan realizes they are shifting blame, using him as a scapegoat. One villager attacks, Turan dodges easily. Using subtle magic, he headbutts the attacker, knocking him down instantly. Another charges and he whispers for him to fall. The man collapses immediately. Turan controls his power carefully, avoiding lethal force. One by one they fall. Soon all the men lie defeated. He tells them they should have used that strength for the funeral. He dismisses the women watching. Returning to his home, inside he reflects on the coming chaos. Knowing they will try to exploit him later, he decides he will simply beat them again if needed. Suddenly loud knocking returns. He calls them insane, opening the door in annoyance, but this time someone different stands there. A tall man with a calm presence. Apologizing politely, the traveler asks for a favor. Turan realizes he is not from the village. Remembering his mother's teachings, he feels awkward, trying to act polite. The man's stomach growls loudly. Turan sighs and lets him inside, preparing a simple meal, apologizing for the lack of food. The man calls it a feast. They begin talking quietly. Turan explains he has lived here all his life, rarely seeing outsiders. The man finds this interesting. Noting his good manners, Turan mentions his mother taught him, but she passed away years ago. The traveler praises her upbringing, saying she must be watching from above. Turan asks why he came here. The man explains he was asked to handle a monster, a dangerous puma in the area. Then he reveals the truth. He is a wizard. Turan realizes he is the one the village expected. The man confirms it calmly, then asks a question. He senses a monster nearby, but cannot find it anywhere. His gaze sharpens slightly, waiting for an answer, as tension quietly builds between them. Kieran finds it strange that Turan already knows about the Elder and the monster yet remains completely calm. Noting that if the monster were to target a human, it would most likely be him. He studies Turan carefully and asks if he is scared, remarking that for a mere shepherd he seems unusually brave, his curiosity deepening as he questions who Turan really is beneath that calm exterior. Turan recalls the words of his mother, remembering the moment he once asked why nobody could ever know he was a wizard. She explained that it was because of the nobles, comparing nobles to shepherds and knights to the dogs they raise, warning that even if they show kindness they could discard or sacrifice him at any time, telling him she never wanted that kind of life for him, and asking if he wished to continue living with her, to which he answered without hesitation that he did. She made him promise that no one could ever learn the truth, warning that if other wizards discovered him they would separate them and turn him into nothing more than a tool, a shepherd dog to be used and discarded whenever convenient. She even told him that to survive, he might one day have to kill people. And as Turan reflects on those words, he realizes this situation may finally be that moment. Meanwhile, Kieran waits for an answer and notices Turan's hesitation, joking that the serious expression only makes things awkward, letting out a light laugh to ease the tension. Turan quickly realizes it was only a joke and apologizes for lacking a sense of humor, while Kieran waves it off and insists he should be the one apologizing as he may have flustered him. Kieran admits that it was his first time making a joke about wizards, which is why he went a bit too far, noting that Turan's reaction was amusing enough to tempt him into teasing more than he should have. Deciding to change the mood, he suggests they properly introduce themselves. Expressing that it is nice to meet him, the old man introduces himself as Kithorn, describing himself simply as a wanderer. Turan feels slightly embarrassed for not introducing himself first and states that he is just a shepherd, adding that he is 18 years old this year, to which Kithorn casually responds that he himself is 75. Prompting Turan to remark that he looks far younger than his age. Kieran explains that wizards age much more slowly than ordinary people and are blessed with far longer lives, a fact that naturally surprises Turan as he listens with interest, curious about the life of someone who has lived so long. Turan asks how Kieran ended up living as a wanderer, and the old man explains that after serving the Arabian family for 60 years he eventually chose to leave, saying that in his later years he desired to roam freely from place to place without being tied down, a lifestyle that Turan finds unexpectedly romantic. As their conversation continues, the atmosphere grows relaxed. Turan quietly reflects on how enjoyable it feels to speak with someone like Kieran. They continue talking as time passes unnoticed, their conversation stretching on until the first light of dawn begins to rise over the horizon. Kieran suddenly realizing how much time has passed without him noticing. As the morning light spreads, Kieran takes out a silver coin and hands it to Turan, explaining that it is Arabian silver and one of the purest forms, worth far more than the meal he was given. Turan accepts it gratefully and wishes him success on his hunt. Kieran laughs and tells him not to act like they will never meet again, suggesting that he might return a few more times to enjoy his cooking before eventually leaving, his tone light as he prepares to depart. Later that day, Turan heads out to the fields as it becomes time for the sheep to graze, commanding them to gather as they immediately respond and begin moving toward him, obeying his words without hesitation. As he watches them, Turan reflects on meeting another wizard for the first time, wondering how long it has been since he had a conversation that felt so natural and comfortable, realizing how different Kieran was compared to anyone he had ever met. He recalls the ease and humor in Kieran's speech, something far beyond any adult he has encountered before, concluding that Kieran is truly a good person, even remembering how the man once brought him a wolf without expecting anything in return. Turan had always believed knights were nothing more than emotionless hunting dogs serving arrogant nobles, but Kieran's presence challenges that belief, leaving him unsure how to even tell the man that there are no more monsters left on Heir Hill. Meanwhile, Kjorn walks through the forest, sensing something unusual in the air as he notices traces of a recent battle, yet strangely he cannot feel any presence of a monster nearby. Looking up, he spots a rock embedded deep within a tree, recognizing it as something launched with incredible force, wondering if the monster had already been hunted and who could have possibly done it. He considers whether the village chief may have hired another wizard, but instead of concern he feels relief knowing that someone has already made the area safe. Suddenly his senses sharpen as he detects something approaching, turning around just in time to see the monster walking toward him, its face completely torn apart as it releases a horrifying scream. Kieran immediately recognizes it as a monster wraith, questioning who could have allowed this to happen, as the creature suddenly attacks, forcing him to leap backward to avoid the strike. He understands that if the mana of a dead monster is not properly absorbed or dispersed, it will transform into a wraith, a basic principle that any wizard should know, making this situation even more suspicious. Leaping into the air, he concludes that the one who killed the beast must have been a wizard, questioning whether they intentionally left it like this or were simply ignorant of the consequences. He dismisses the idea that a novice knight could have defeated such a monster, considering whether there was another intention behind it, but ultimately deciding that regardless of the reason he must destroy it. Forming a bow of pure lightning in his hand, he draws it back and releases a magical arrow, but the attack disperses instantly upon contact with the monster, leaving him momentarily stunned. Kieran questions whether the monster mana is far stronger than his own, but before he can react, the creature suddenly sinks into the ground and disappears from sight. He realizes it may be attempting to counter magic with magic and searches for its location, only to sense something wrong as the creature emerges from his own shadow and looms over him. The monster strikes down and hits his arm, sending blood flying from the impact as Kieran recognizes that this is far beyond the level a mere knight could handle in battle. He concludes that only a lower-ranked noble or higher could stand a chance against something like this, as the monster sends him flying backward through the air. As he regains his footing, he reflects on the absurdity of encountering such a powerful wraith in a remote village, thinking that life truly throws unexpected challenges without warning. The creature continues to mutate, its form becoming even more grotesque and horrifying as its power rises further, pushing Kieran closer to his limit. Realizing this may be the end, he refuses to die quietly, vowing that even if he falls, he will take the monster down with him. He gathers all of his mana into his hand, preparing a final attack as he waits for the creature to lunge, planning to strike it directly at the moment of impact. As both Kieran and the monster charge toward each other, a sudden flash cuts through the air, something flying out from the forest at incredible speed. A rock slams into the monster with immense force, knocking it to the ground instantly, leaving Kieran stunned by what he just witnessed. Taran steps forward calmly and asks if Kieran is all right, his presence unexpected as Kieran lets out a small laugh and remarks that the shepherd joke is quite shocking as well. Still surprised, Kieran quickly realizes the truth, understanding that Taran is a wizard, asking why he never revealed it, but Taran remains silent. Kieran changes his question and instead asks why he chose to help him, pointing out that Taran could have simply walked away and let him die without consequence. Taran answers simply, recalling the time Kieran brought him a wolf, remembering how he questioned why the man would go so far for such a small favor. As Kieran listens in confusion, Taran continues, explaining that with his abilities he could easily earn far more while living comfortably elsewhere. Kieran responds by calling the villagers pitiful, prompting Taran to ask what he means. As Kieran explains, they live on the frontier, constantly trembling in fear without proper protection. Taran argues that it is not their fault, but Kieran counters by saying that a wizard inherits the power of a god and should live with pride by protecting the powerless. He admits not all wizards think this way, as everyone chooses their own path in life, leaving the meaning behind his words clear. Taran smiles slightly and agrees, but before the moment can settle, the monster rises again, preparing for another attack. Kieran immediately turns serious and tells Taran to listen carefully, warning that this is not an enemy they can handle, explaining that it is far beyond their level. He states clearly that unless someone is at least a noble, they stand no chance, ordering Taran to go to the village chief and help evacuate everyone. As Kieran prepares himself once more, he declares that he will hold the monster off alone, ready to risk everything in order to protect the others. Kieran admits he had spoken boldly, yet does not know how long he can truly endure, while Taran calmly tells him it will be fine, leaving Kieran confused as he questions what he means, and Taran explains that if the attack he just unleashed managed to land, then everything will be alright, as Kieran struggles to understand, wondering if that strike was not even his full strength, believing that a mere young knight hiding in the mountains could never hunt a wraith feared even by nobles. Yet what he witnesses now is far beyond a simple bond formed in a rural village, nor is it reckless bravado from a runaway knight, but something far greater, a scene that feels like the birth of a wizard who could one day overturn the world itself. And as Taran stands before the monster, he admits he too is curious about his own limits, and declares he will test them here, prompting Kieran to step forward and refuse to let him fight alone, warning that despite his talent, this enemy is far too dangerous to face without joining forces. Yet in an instant the monster lunges, only to be blasted away by a sudden strike, leaving Kieran realizing he cannot even react fast enough and would only become a hindrance, accepting that in this moment he offers no aid and that his role is instead to nurture the blooming talent before him. while Turan presses on, launching relentless attacks against the beast, only to notice that his blows have no effect, as Chiron shouts that a wraith cannot be slain through physical means alone, forcing Turan to ask how he is meant to kill it, and Chiron instructs him to use fire or lightning, igniting a spark within the boy as flames flicker to life in his eyes. Yet the fire merely bounces off the creature, leading him to realize it is not working, and Chiron is stunned that Turan lacks even the basic understanding that proper causality is required when applying magic to living beings, questioning if he truly has no common sense, until he realizes that Turan must have been the one who killed the original monster and allowed it to become a wraith, concluding that he has never absorbed mana in his life, urging him not to simply ignite a flame but to create it and then launch it toward the target. Yet even as he gives instruction, he cannot help but be astonished by the boy's raw strength, as Turan steadies himself and begins to gather fire into his hand, and Chiron reflects that while conjuring flames is simple for a wizard, controlling them requires discipline and training, yet Turan accomplishes it instantly, forming a blazing fire that surges with power, stepping forward without hesitation before hurling it at the monster. The flames erupt upon impact in a violent explosion, the wraith letting out a piercing scream as it burns, writhing within the inferno, and Chiron urgently tells him to keep his mind focused, warning that he must continue pouring mana into the spell so the fire does not fade, insisting that every trace of the wraith must be completely burned away. And as Turan obeys, channeling more mana into the flames, his eyes begin to shimmer with a rainbow glow, the fire growing fiercer with each passing moment until the monstrous presence is finally consumed. And Chiron stands in disbelief, unable to accept what he has just witnessed, reflecting on how overwhelmingly powerful that wraith had been, knowing that it would normally require at least the strength of a noble to defeat it. Yet Turan had brought it down alone, as the boy calmly asks if the battle is truly over, while Chiron remains stunned that a mere shepherd from the mountains achieved such a feat, quickly warning him that if he does not wish to face another wraith, he must absorb the mana left behind. And when Turan asks how it is done, Chiron tells him to imagine drawing something into himself, guiding him through the process as Turan nods and places his hand upon the remains, focusing deeply as a green aura begins to rise from the corpse, gathering into his palm, and as the energy flows into him, it spreads throughout his entire body, circulating endlessly, causing him to shiver as an unfamiliar sensation takes hold. And Chiron explains that he will feel a certain kind of pleasure from the process, still unable to believe what he is seeing even with his own eyes. He asks if this was truly the boy's first time absorbing mana, and Turan confirms it without hesitation, leading Chiron to explain that after an initial awakening, mana usually grows slowly over time, and the most efficient way to increase it is by killing monsters or other wizards and absorbing their energy, realizing that for Turan to display such growth on his first attempt means his innate potential exists on an entirely different level. Concluding that the boy must belong to a noble lineage, Chiron lowers himself in respect and apologizes for his earlier rudeness, asking which noble house Turan comes from. Yet the boy simply tells him to wipe the blood from his body first, and later inside the house Chiron sits with his arm wrapped in bandages, apologizing once more for his lack of manners, feeling ashamed that someone as extraordinary as Turan had to perform such a task. But Turan reminds him that he is not anyone special, insisting that he is merely a shepherd who does not even know who his father is. His gaze sharpens as he tells Chiron to stop with the formalities, and though the man agrees, he cannot help but question why someone so powerful would choose such a life, explaining that he does not mean disrespect. Yet the role simply does not suit him, and Turan reveals that it was his mother's final wish, something she held on to until her dying breath, prompting Chiron to ask for more, as Turan explains that nobles live below the mountains, and if his identity as a wizard were revealed, he would only be used and discarded, and Chiron acknowledges that his mother was wise, surprising Turan, who expected him to call it overprotective, yet Chiron admits she was not entirely wrong, reflecting that great power inevitably invites conflict, recalling a devastating war between noble houses just 20 years prior, a battle between the house he served, Arabian, and the great house of Zahar, where countless lives were lost, and of the 3,000 knights of Arabian more than 900 perished, nearly a third wiped away. And among them were all those he held dear, his friend Denver, his teacher Hartman, and even his beloved wife and son, all massacred by House Zahar, leading him to admit that his mother's fears held truth, as the life of a knight can vanish far more easily and meaninglessly than that of a commoner. Yet he points out that she was wrong about one thing, Turan's aptitude, admitting with quiet embarrassment that he himself is a fairly skilled knight, yet even he could not defeat the wraith that Turan destroyed with ease, declaring that the boy's potential is not merely that of a knight, but at the very least that of a noble, and among them an upper tier at that, causing Turan to question whether his mother had lied about his father being a knight. Yet Chiron explains that on rare occasions a child of lesser ability can be born among nobles, or a noble-level child among knights, suggesting that it would be better for Turan to leave the mountain and step into the wider world. When Turan asks why he should do so, Chiron explains that humanity is still not the true master of the world, that long ago other races cast aside by the gods continue to watch for their chance to rise again, and yet even in such times nobles remain consumed by their own wars, insisting that this is an age that desperately needs someone both strong and kind like Turan. asking him if he is truly content living as a shepherd, and Turan quietly wonders what he could possibly gain from descending the mountain. To which Kiarn answers that it depends on his desires, whether it be wealth, fame, authority, family, or companionship, explaining that such things are difficult to obtain where he is now, urging him to imagine a life where he could wander freely, slay monsters, explore the unknown, or even be adopted into a noble house and walk the path of power. And as Turan listens, he admits that it does sound far more interesting than tending sheep, feeling for the first time a genuine curiosity about the world beyond. While Kiarn worries he may be placing unnecessary expectations upon him, he still promises to support whatever path Turan chooses, before asking about his bloodline ability, leaving the boy confused as Kiarn apologizes and explains that he often forgets how little Turan knows of magic, describing bloodline abilities as traits inherited from noble ancestors known as the Frians, and that possessing such an ability is what separates nobles from knights, asking if any spell came unnaturally easy to him or if he possesses an exceptional ability that does not rely on magic. And though Turan wonders if it is simply his strength, Kiarn clarifies that mana alone enhances physical ability, prompting Turan to mention his keen sense of smell and his skill at throwing stones, leading Kiarn to note that heightened senses can indeed be considered a bloodline trait, while proficiency with thrown weapons is associated with House Arabian, though not uniquely, urging him to continue. And after listening carefully, Kiarn eventually declares that he believes he knows which house Turan's abilities most closely resemble, causing the boy to ask for its name, and as Kiran's expression darkens, he reveals it belongs to a great house known as the Pursuers, or Hunters, the very house Zahar that once stood as his enemy, and upon hearing this, Turan grows visibly uneasy, his expression filled with concern as he realizes he shares blood with those who brought Kiran so much pain, considering whether he should apologize despite knowing they are strangers to him. Yet Kiran tells him not to carry such a burden, reminding him that he had no part in that war, and that such matters belong to the past, declaring that hatred will never end if blood continues to answer blood. And when Turan asks if he holds regrets, Kiran questions what he means, only for the boy to clarify he is referring to his suggestion of leaving the mountain, and Kiran explains that pursuing power would inevitably lead him toward House Zahar, acknowledging his exceptional talent, yet stating that he trusts the goodness within him, explaining that Turan revealed his hidden identity simply to save him, and that if someone like him were to rise within that house, perhaps he could one day prevent such tragedies from ever happening again. Kiran tells him there is no need to think too seriously about the matter, reflecting that no decision about joining any family has been made yet. Yet Turan calmly declares that his thoughts are now clear and that he wants to try descending the mountain. And while Kiran acknowledges that he has thought it through well, the boy adds that he does not wish to leave immediately, explaining that he will only head down once Kiran's injuries have healed, prompting Kiran to call him kind as he nods and insists that his wounds are merely scratches, though deep down he recognizes that the boy before him is truly a good person. Later inside the house, Kiran begins to explain that mana is absolutely required to use magic, stating that it is often referred to as the key to omnipotence. And when Turan asks about the meaning of the term, Kiran clarifies that it is not truly omnipotent despite the name, explaining instead that magic can only be used when one possesses mana that properly matches it, leading the boy to ask what determines that standard. And without hesitation, Kiran explains that the difficulty of magic is largely determined by three factors: bloodline, affinity, and causality. He continues by explaining that bloodline is defined by the lineage one is born into, something that applies to most nobles rather than knights, and he considers that it would likely be difficult for Turan to heal wounds using magic, asking if he is mistaken, only for Turan to confirm that he is not. Heir continues explaining that for members of the Ravista bloodline from the south, such feats can be achieved even without training, since the power itself originates from their bloodline. And as Turan listens, he asks about the second factor, affinity, which Heir describes as familiarity, explaining that it reflects how a mage can more easily perform actions they prefer or have grown accustomed to, and Turan reflects that it is similar to how he created a fireball as naturally as throwing a rock, prompting Heir to confirm his understanding while noting that simply forming flames would not have produced the same speed or destructive force. And as he shifts to the final factor, he emphasizes that causality is the most important, though he admits he does not fully grasp it himself, asking Turan what would happen if he attempted to kill him directly using mana, leading Turan to casually respond that perhaps a faint light would shine from his head and nothing more would occur, and Kiran affirms that this is precisely what happens when causality is absent, explaining that without a proper cause for an intended result, or when the desired outcome is excessively difficult, the magic simply fails to manifest effectively. And as Turan reflects on this, he begins to piece together an understanding, realizing that instead of merely wishing for Kiran's death with mana, he would need to create a logical cause such as conjuring and launching flames, something far more natural than forcing an unnatural outcome. And Kiran nods in agreement, quietly thinking that Turan might have been suited to the life of a scholar rather than a mage, yet Turan shifts the topic by mentioning that he can control ordinary animals at will, questioning why magical beasts require such different handling. And Kiran explains that it is because of the mana within them, their conversation continuing while a sheep quietly listens nearby. And Turan reflects that magic is far from simple, while Chiron responds that a true mage must understand not only how to wield mana, but also the principles and conditions behind it, leading Chiron to wonder whether the House Zahar bloodline also possesses unique abilities, and Chiron confirms that they excel in stealth and tracking, suggesting that Chiron attempted himself, and as Chiron agrees he closes his eyes, focusing on the desire to remain unseen, wishing for a state where neither sound nor scent could betray him, and slowly his presence begins to fade until he vanishes entirely, asking if it worked, leaving Chiron standing in stunned silence as he sees nothing before him, eventually confirming that Chiron succeeded since he can no longer perceive him at all. And as the room falls quiet, Chiron feels a subtle sadness at the emptiness before Chiron gradually reappears, and Chiron reflects that it has been a long time since he last witnessed that ability, acknowledging with a nod that it remains a terrifying power, recalling how during the war the Arabian knights feared that very ability above all else, while Chiron considers how overwhelmingly unfair such power seems, yet Chiron assures him that it is not invincible, and declares his intent to teach him proper magic training methods, prompting Chiron to remark that he is being overly kind in guiding someone from an enemy bloodline, though Chiron reminds him that he saved his life and treated him with sincerity, reaffirming that he trusts his character. And later an unpleasant bald man questions whether Chiron truly intends to sell the sheep and leave, demanding to know who will take over the shepherding and how he could decide such matters without consulting them, yet Chiron calmly responds that they can find another shepherd themselves, stating that what he does with his belongings is none of their concern, warning that they should purchase the sheep at a fair price or he will simply release them and depart, adding that they are free to try capturing them, though it would not be easy, and as the village chief observes him, he realizes that this is a man who keeps his word and that provoking him would bring no benefit, conceding with reluctant understanding as he hands over a bag of money and tells him to do as he wishes. And as Chiron and Chiron begin to leave, Chiron reflects that the villagers still owe compensation to Chiron and briefly considers collecting it. Yet Chiron dismisses the idea, stating he has no intention of receiving anything since Chiron was the one who defeated the beast, and Chiron acknowledges this before realizing they have reached the point where their paths must diverge, and Chiron apologizes for declining the offer to travel together, explaining that he is more at ease on his own, while Chiron accepts this without resentment, expressing his gratitude for everything he has been taught, and Chiron bids him farewell, urging him to take care, while Chiron replies that he hopes they will meet again with smiles, watching the knight's retreating figure for a long time until it fades into the distance, and only afterward does he come to understand why he disliked the man speaking formally to him, realizing that while he had never lacked love from his mother, he had always quietly longed for a father figure, someone to guide him and serve as an example of the man he should become, and with that realization his journey continues, as he ventures deep into the desert and beyond a vast canyon, and as he walks he lifts his gaze to see farther ahead, eventually spotting a group of people in the distance, wondering if they might be traveling merchants moving between villages, and thinking it fortunate since he can ask them for directions. He approaches and is immediately questioned by a man demanding to know who he is to block their path, and Chiron calmly explains that he is traveling alone and asks for the location of the nearest city, and they inform him that if he follows the road they came from, he will arrive at a place called Mure, and after thanking them Chiron begins to leave, only to be stopped as one of the men calls out for him to wait, questioning whether he truly intends to leave after receiving information without offering anything in return, and Chiron turns back in confusion asking what the man wants, only for the man to insist that receiving something requires giving something back, and as they draw their blades, they order him to remove his bag, prompting Chiron to ask if they are bandits, and the man responds with a challenge asking what he would do if they were, while another declares that this is mere recklessness, noting that in this wasteland no one would find it strange if someone died, pointing his sword at Chiron and ordering him to hand over his belongings while they are still being merciful, explaining that killing and stripping him would only make things unnecessarily bloody, and Chiron calmly acknowledges their intent, recognizing them as killers, recalling his training with Chiron as memories of their lessons resurface. The group bursts into laughter at his words, mocking him as they claim he sounds like some kind of wizard. Yet without hesitation, Chiron raises his hand and with a single motion releases a powerful gust of wind that sends the men flying through the air, their bodies thrown back violently as shock spreads across their faces, and as he observes the result, he notes that rather than generating wind from nothing, shaping existing air with his hand and amplifying it consumes far less mana, realizing with quiet surprise that he can produce such overwhelming force with only a small amount, leaving the men completely disoriented and unable to comprehend what just happened. And before they can recover, Chiron reaches for his water pouch, drawing the liquid into the air as it gathers and hardens into a crystal, forming sharp structures that glisten under the light, and with growing focus he creates more of them, multiplying the crystalline weapons as the bandits begin to realize the grave mistake they have made, and in an instant one of the men is pierced clean through, the crystal impaling him and ending his life immediately. And as Chiron watches, he reflects that while this spell is meant to be effective in areas rich with water, simply throwing stones still feels faster and stronger for him at the moment. Panic spreads among the remaining bandits as they begin to apologize frantically, claiming they did not know he was a wizard, Yet even as they beg for mercy, their leader subtly distracts him, while the others attempt to circle behind, creeping closer in a desperate attempt to turn the situation. But Turan calmly lifts his foot and slams it into the ground, and in that moment pillars of sand erupt upward beneath them, piercing through their bodies as the earth itself becomes a weapon, impaling each of them in a brutal instant, and the battlefield falls silent as the leader remains frozen in place, staring in disbelief at the corpses of his fallen men, his voice trembling as he mutters that such a thing is impossible. Yet Turan calmly states that he has a single question, and the man, now terrified, declares he will answer anything, and Turan asks why they attacked him without any real plan, pointing out that a lone traveler could easily be a wizard, and the leader explains that it was because Turan lowered his head, that even when they spoke rudely he bowed and greeted them, leading them to believe he was nothing more than an ordinary person, and upon hearing this Turan thanks him, acknowledging that he has learned something valuable. A faint smile forms on the bandit's face as he asks if he will truly be spared, yet above him water begins to gather, forming into a suspended mass as Turan recalls Chiron's stern warning, his voice echoing in memory as he explains that Turan will meet many kinds of people and must understand one thing above all else, that he must never show mercy to scum like bandits, those who harm others without hesitation for their own gain, and that he speaks so firmly because he understands the boy's nature, and as the memory fades, Turan quietly acknowledges the truth in those words, realizing that sparing one life out of pity could lead to the suffering of many innocent people, and without hesitation he brings the water down, ending the man's life, and as silence returns he reflects that he has delayed long enough, turning his attention to the tracks left behind by the cart the bandits have been dragging, the clear lines etched across the sand, offering him a path forward, and as he follows them one thought burns deeply within his mind, that he has killed people, and though guilt weighs on him, he understands that letting them go was never an option. Karen's warning resurfaces in his thoughts, reminding him that such people would only continue to harm others without hesitation, and like tracks in the desert slowly fading as the wind carries sand across them, Turan's turbulent emotions begin to settle as he recalls everything he has been taught, and eventually his journey leads him to something entirely new as he arrives before the small city of Mure, a place vastly different from the village where he spent his life, and as he gazes upon it he finds it beautiful, the streets filled with people moving endlessly, more than he has ever seen gathered in one place, the buildings themselves unfamiliar in design, making him feel as though he has truly stepped into another world. And as he walks through the bustling streets, he approaches a shopkeeper who greets him, asking what he can offer. Yet Turan states that he is not here to buy anything, recalling Charon's advice that if he needed a place to stay, he should seek out an inn, and the shopkeeper immediately dismisses him, telling him to leave if he is not purchasing fruit, leaving Turan confused as he wonders if such rudeness is normal in cities, or if there exists some unspoken rule that one must buy something before asking questions. Pointing to a fruit, he asks its price, and the merchant replies that it costs 2 dupit, prompting Turan to ask what a dupit even is, and the merchant notes that he must be an outsider unfamiliar with their currency, adding that other coins are acceptable, and after handing over payment Turan asks for directions to an inn, and the man directs him toward the largest one in the city, and upon arriving he is welcomed by a staff member named Lena, who greets him warmly and even remarks on his appearance, calling him a handsome guest. As Turan asks the cost for a night, she tells him it is 16 dupit, and he agrees to stay while mentioning he has another question, asking if there are any nearby monsters with bounties, which surprises her. And as he reflects on his need to hunt monsters to absorb mana, he recalls Chiron explaining that such hunts also bring income, and when she hesitates, he asks why she is not answering, prompting her to remark that nothing in this world is free, eventually persuading him to buy a drink before directing him to City Hall. And when he asks what that is, she looks at him in disbelief, stating that he must truly be from the countryside, before explaining that city halls handle public matters and are staffed by officials working under the city's lord, adding that it is likely closed for the night, and suggesting he visit in the morning if he seeks monster bounties. And as she studies him, she asks if he is also a monster hunter, prompting Turan to question what that means, and she explains that some believe ordinary people can become wizards by hunting monsters, dismissing it as foolish superstition. Yet Turan wonders if it is truly false, when suddenly a hand rests on his shoulder, and a man named Midden declares that it is not superstition but fact, claiming he has witnessed it himself, surprising Lena, who thought him dead. Yet Midden insists he will not die until he becomes a wizard, and as Turan gently removes his hand, he expresses interest in hearing more, and Midden explains that just as wizards grow stronger by hunting monsters, ordinary people can awaken in the same way, revealing that he and his companions are pursuing that very path. Turan asks if any of them have already become wizards, but Midden denies it, explaining that the city only has the Lord's wizard and 3 others, and observing Turan's worn equipment, he questions whether he even has a proper weapon, prompting Turan to reveal his sling, which Midden notes has clearly seen heavy use, and while Turan explains its effectiveness for firing small projectiles quickly, Midden suggests it would suffice for hunting smaller monsters, mentioning that they have been hoping to find another ranged fighter, and asking if he would join them, but Turan declines with a polite smile, thanking them for the offer, and later that night as he rests in his room he reflects on the chaos of the day, still struggling to believe that he has truly left his village behind, wondering what lies ahead, when suddenly he senses a presence outside his door, and recalling Charon's warning that cities are not inherently safe, he approaches cautiously, channeling mana into his hand as a precaution. Before opening the door slightly and finding Lina standing there, she asks if he was asleep, and claims she came because the room might be cold, offering to keep him warm, leaving Turan confused as he questions her meaning, and with a knowing smile she begins to undress, stating that her intentions are exactly as they seem. Yet Turan only grows more bewildered, asking again what she means, and she explains that for a small price she will fulfill whatever he desires, assuming his intentions based on his expression. Yet Turan remains completely unmoved, his expression calm and almost detached as Lina stares at him in disbelief, and in that moment he recalls Kindred's angered warning, the firm reminder that he must never fall for such traps, and the lesson echoes clearly in his mind as he stands there, unwavering and unaffected. The man had warned him that he must always be cautious around women and inns and prostitutes in general, explaining that many of them carry diseases, and while those like him possess strong resistance and would not suffer much, Turan could unknowingly pass such illnesses to another woman in the future, advising him not to let fleeting desire trap him into choices he would regret. And as Turan reflects on this, he begins to realize that cities are not easy places to live either, recalling the fruit seller from earlier and now Lina as well, seeing how even the smallest bits of information or conversation come with a price, leading him to quietly conclude that cities are far colder than they appear. And as he continues thinking, he overhears Midon and his companions speaking nearby, questioning why he had tried to bring along that boy from earlier, one of them remarking that Turan did not seem particularly useful, while another agrees and adds that his arrogance would make him perfect bait. Yet Midon calmly explains that it is because Turan reminds him of his younger self, believing that if the boy stayed close he might at least survive a little longer, though the others tell him he is far too kind-hearted, and hearing this Turan cannot help but smile, thinking that perhaps the city is not entirely cold after all. The following day he heads to the city hall where a man asks if he needs assistance and Turan questions if he is an official, only for the man to respond bluntly, asking what else he could possibly be, and Turan explains that he came to hunt monsters, which leaves the man momentarily confused. And as Turan recalls Kiorn's earlier words that the world would not treat him kindly, he instead considers that there is no reason for it to be kind at all, remembering that if he wishes for people to treat him with respect, the method is simple. Revealing himself as a wizard would be enough for others to bow their heads. The official hands him a document, instructing him to read it and return it rather than taking it, and as Turan looks over it, he asks if the target is a crow monster, prompting the man to respond sarcastically, questioning if it looks like a cat instead, before explaining that once a monster is killed, it must be brought back so that a wizard can disperse its mana and prevent it from turning into a wraith, warning that abandoning such a corpse is punishable by death under city law. And Turan understands this well, recalling the consequences of such mistakes and knowing he cannot repeat them. He then asks why knights do not hunt monsters, and the official replies that they do not have time for such tasks, explaining that their duty is to maintain order within the city, while dealing with monsters outside falls to people like him. And as Turan leaves, the man mutters that another corpse will likely be added beyond the city walls. Yet not long after, Turan returns, carrying a dead monster with a massive hole in its chest, shocking everyone present as they struggle to believe their eyes, questioning how he managed to bring it back so quickly, and whether he truly defeated it alone. Turan confirms that he did and asks if he can receive the reward, and the official quickly agrees, rushing off to retrieve it before handing over a bag of money and telling him to rest, while the others continue to marvel at the condition of the corpse, noting that even its wings remain intact and wondering how such a creature could be brought back like this. And as the official looks over again, he asks why Turan is still standing there, prompting the boy to ask if there are more monsters worth hunting, leaving them questioning if he truly intends to continue. Later at the inn, Lena presents him with some of the most expensive items on the menu, admitting she never imagined someone like him could defeat 30 monsters in just 3 days, remarking that he must have earned a fortune from the bounties, while Turan eats quietly, almost childlike in his focus, explaining that money is not his true goal but rather the mana of the monsters, noting that thanks to it he has grown significantly stronger, far beyond when he first met Kiorn, though he now senses a limit approaching, realizing that hunting only weak monsters will no longer be enough to push him further. He then turns to Lena with a question, asking if she had taken a bite of his meal, only for her to remind him that he finished it entirely on his own, teasing him for his appetite despite his slender frame, while the chef expresses satisfaction at seeing his food enjoyed. And as Turan compliments the meal and prepares to leave, one of Midon's companions suddenly grabs his coat, questioning why he is enjoying such fine food alone, mocking him for his recent earnings and suggesting he share some charity with them. Without hesitation, Turan strikes him across the face, sending him stumbling backward, as he calmly asks if he would like more charity. And when another man lunges at him in anger, Turan effortlessly dodges and counters with another blow, while a third rushes in with a chair only to have it blocked with ease, and with a simple flick of his finger, Turan strikes the man's forehead, ending the fight instantly as Lena shouts for them to stop causing trouble in the inn. Later, Midon approaches and apologizes sincerely, explaining that he has already scolded them and promising such behavior will not happen again. admitting that they have been struggling financially and grew jealous upon seeing Turan's success, and after forcing the others to apologize, he explains that they may not even be able to afford their lodging, though he insists it is their own problem. Yet Turan quietly produces a bag of money and offers it to him, leaving Midan confused as he asks why. Turan explains that it is repayment for the kindness Midan showed earlier, recalling how he had tried to look out for him, and when Midan asks how he even knew about that, Turan simply states that nothing comes for free, requesting information in return, and Midan laughs, declaring that information is his specialty, and promising to share everything he knows. And later, as Turan stands outside the city, he reflects that this may be his final hunt here, noting that Midan provided details about his next destination, and that it is time to move on. He thinks about how much useful information he received and considers Midan a genuinely good person, perhaps not as experienced as Kiran, but all the more sincere because of it. Yet as he prepares to leave, he suddenly senses something, recognizing a familiar scent that causes him to run toward it, hoping his instincts are wrong, and as he enters the jungle, he notices markings on a tree before spotting a man collapsed nearby, his chest torn open and bleeding heavily, and Turan recognizes him as one of Midan's companions. His gaze shifts and he sees Midan lying lifeless on the ground. The coins Turan had given him scattered nearby and stained with blood, and for a moment he can only wonder what had happened, kneeling beside them as one man barely clings to life, struggling to speak until he manages to utter a single word, rabbit, leaving Turan confused until the man clarifies with his final breath that it is a rabbit monster, and as Turan turns he sees it, a creature feasting on another body. The beast notices him and lifts its head, its red eyes glowing as it locks onto him, and in an instant it charges forward with terrifying speed, forcing Turan to dodge as it crashes into a tree, destroying it completely, and he realizes just how fast it is, knowing he was nearly struck, yet he quickly regains focus, spinning his sling and releasing a shot, the stone splitting into three midair as they rush toward the creature, only for it to destroy them effortlessly. Turan observes that the beast is accustomed to defending against thrown weapons, and as it prepares to strike again, it suddenly loses sight of him as Turan vanishes completely, halting its attack in confusion, and in the next moment, Turan reappears behind it, dagger in hand as he drives it into the creature's neck before retreating, and once again fading from sight, using his magic to disappear into the air itself. The monster strikes in that instant, yet Turan has already faded from sight, becoming completely invisible, leaving the beast to slash through nothing but air as its attack crashes into a tree and cuts it down. The rabbit monster quickly descends into madness, furiously hacking apart every tree within reach, its rage growing wilder with each swing, until time drags on and its body begins to fail. Exhaustion creeps in as it finally slows to a halt, releasing a deafening scream into the forest. While blood continues to pour from its wounds, its strength fades and at last it collapses lifeless onto the ground, defeated not by force but by Turan's calculated provocation. As silence settles, he releases his invisibility and calmly approaches the corpse, extending his hand toward the fallen beast as he begins absorbing its mana, immediately sensing the difference as the flow of energy surpasses that of the leopard he once faced. Nearby, the barely surviving man watches in disbelief, unable to accept what he is witnessing. Turan calmly confirms that he is indeed a wizard. The man questions why he would hide such an identity, yet Turan instead asks if any of them have belongings he can deliver to their families. The man breaks down in tears, admitting he has no one left. Regret fills his gaze as Turan recalls Midan mentioning a great city called Orum. Curiosity sparks within him as he asks what a library is, and Midan explains that it holds thousands of books. Noting how the moment Turan heard the word books, his interest became undeniable. Turan questions if that is true, and Midan adds that not just anyone can enter such a place, prompting Turan to ask how he could gain access. Midan reveals that only wizards are allowed inside. Hearing this, Turan quietly declares that he understands and has already made his decision. When Midan asks what he means, Turan states that he will go to the great city he mentioned. Now standing over freshly made graves, Turan bids them farewell, wishing them peace. Turning away, he continues his journey. Some time later, he finds himself standing in line, feeling slightly embarrassed, remembering how impressed he once was by the small city of Mure. Now before the massive city of Orum, he realizes just how vast it truly is. Judging by its overwhelming scale, he had never imagined so many people would gather just to enter. His gaze shifts to the guards as he wonders if they are searching for criminals. As expected of such a grand city, its systems are far more structured. The guards suddenly stop him and he asks what is wrong, only to be told that he cannot enter in his current filthy state. They advise him to at least clean himself before trying again. Later, he finally makes his way inside and stands before a towering structure. He reflects that this must be the library. Midan spoke of its presence overwhelming, as if constructed through magic itself. Approaching the entrance, he declares his intent to enter, only to be stopped by guards who state that only wizards are permitted. He insists that he is one, yet a guard reacts angrily, questioning if he wishes to die for impersonating a wizard, declaring that someone like him could never be one. As the guard attempts to channel mana, Turan recalls Kioran's words. Wizards can sense each other's power and determine strength. Deciding to use this knowledge, he releases an immense surge of mana. The guard immediately collapses, overwhelmed by the sheer pressure, realizing that Turan is no ordinary wizard, but one of noble class or higher. In panic, he introduces himself as Kenya, a knight of House Valtes, and demands to know Turan's origin. Turan calmly asks if revealing such information is necessary for entry, and the man replies that it is not. However, he explains that to use the library, Turan must receive permission from the master of Valtes. When Turan asks what that entails, the guard assures him he will contact the house on his behalf. Later, Turan sighs, realizing he had expected a simple process, yet now finds himself being attended to by maids within a bathhouse. Confusion crosses his mind as he wonders how things escalated to this point. He tells them to stop asking if he cannot wash himself, but they explain that failing to properly serve an esteemed guest would result in punishment. Accepting this, he allows them to continue as they thank him sincerely. Later, one maid blurts out that he is amazing. She quickly covers her mouth in embarrassment, and Turan asks if something is on his face. She apologizes, explaining she was overwhelmed by how handsome he is. He reassures her there is nothing to forgive, yet the other maids urge him not to speak so casually to them. At that moment, someone enters the room expressing surprise. A girl steps forward, remarking that she cannot believe he is the same guest who arrived looking like a beggar. She observes that after cleaning up, he resembles a prince, while her bodyguard warns her about her words. Turan introduces himself and she responds with her name Azella. She asks which house he belongs to, yet he hesitates, explaining it is difficult to answer. She sighs, saying that is unfortunate. Before deciding to tease him for withholding the truth, she releases her mana, allowing it to spread throughout the room as if challenging him to respond. Turan feels the immense pressure of her mana crashing into him, yet after a brief moment he releases his own. Their auras collide violently, causing the surroundings to tremble as a guard rushes in to shield the maids from the overwhelming force. After a short clash, Turan withdraws his mana and Azella follows. She lets out a surprised reaction, glancing at her trembling hands before laughing and suddenly asking if he wants to marry her. Caught completely off guard, Turan freezes, unable to process her words as she teases him, assuring it was only a joke, yet still urges him to consider it, since the seat beside her remains empty. With that, she leaves alongside her guards while Turan watches her departure before noticing his own hands trembling as well. Realizing that her mana is at least equal to his, he begins to question if such strength is considered normal in this city. The scene shifts as Turan is finally granted an audience with Rug Valtes, the Lord of Orum, who welcomes him as a young noble and asks if he already knows his name. Turan introduces himself and Rug repeats it before asking if he seeks access to the library, mentioning that many come chasing rumors of ancient magic or secrets to increase mana. He clarifies that no such things exist there. Turan calmly replies that he never sought those things. After studying him briefly, Rug grants permission, noting that nothing within is confidential to his house. As night has fallen, he suggests Turan return the next day and rest for now, asking if that is acceptable. Turan expresses his gratitude, promising not to forget the kindness. The following day, the guards verify his pass and welcome him as an esteemed guest into the Sky Library. As he pushes open the doors and steps inside, he looks upward, seeing an endless spiral of shelves stretching toward the sky. At last, he understands the true nature of this place. A voice then calls out to him and he turns to see a young girl introducing herself as the librarian. She states she will explain the rules by order of the Lord. Surprised that someone so young holds such a role, Turan listens as she raises a finger, explaining that he must compensate for any damage, that no books may be taken outside, and that she will be watching him at all times. Feeling uneasy, he asks if she could stand farther away while he reads. Before asking if she has read the books herself, she confirms this and offers to help him find anything he needs, even suggesting genres like romance, history, or something more provocative due to his age. This leaves him momentarily stunned, but gathering himself, Turan states that he wishes to learn the basic common sense of the world, which in turn surprises her. Moving quickly, she gathers a heavy stack of books, placing them before him, explaining that many are too old to be useful, but guiding him toward a more suitable section. He thanks her and she responds warmly as he picks up a book, reflecting on what it truly is. Opening it carefully, he begins to read, his expression slowly changing as he realizes just how incredible these books are. And from that day forward, Turan continues this routine, returning again and again to immerse himself within the endless knowledge of the library. Turan now delves into the world's geography, its countless races, absorbing knowledge about wizardly etiquette, the crafting and processing of various items, studying monsters and relics from the age of the Old Empire. Each book he reads adding depth and clarity to a world that had once been nothing but an empty unknown. Slowly his understanding grows sharper and more vivid. Lord Rug Valtes later remarks on Turan's excellent use of the library, Tarn confirming the boy's diligence. The Lord states that beyond treating him as a noble, allowing him access was a gesture of goodwill, and adds that he expects some compensation too. Turan does not hesitate, asking what the Lord requires. Rug explains that a monster has appeared north of Orum, attacking travelers, noting that 4 knights sent to subdue it never returned, apparently devoured. He adds that with only 2 members available from his house, a noble must personally intervene. Turan agrees silently, thinking that protecting the people is exactly what a wizard ought to do, yet an unease lingers in him, sensing that wizards rarely intervene in such matters. Rugg emphasizes that the northern road is a vital trade route blocked for 10 days, a timeline that predates Turin's arrival, explaining the Lord's willingness to let him use the library. The scene shifts as a large group departs from Orum, Azella commenting that her father is extraordinary to mobilize a guest for a monster hunt, and questioning whether the four knights were truly that unreliable. She clarifies that she is not blaming anyone yet, insists the Lord is making a fuss. The man beside her laughs, suggesting that calling the Lord fussy might be excessive. Azella snaps at him to drop it. He pauses, turning to introduce himself as Marvin Valtes, expressing that he looks forward to working with Turan. Turan returns the greeting politely. As they walk, Azella urges a swift resolution to finish quickly and return to rest. Marvin leans in, teasing if Turan is interested in his big sister. Turan instantly replies no. Marvin, visibly relieved. Suddenly, the lead guard shouts for everyone to halt. Ahead, they find a carriage destroyed along the road. Inspecting the wreckage, a guard asks if the creature was responsible, while another deduces that the travelers must have come from the south since the north had been forbidden. Turan studies a mark on a wooden board in silence before declaring that the monster is a monkey. Azella repeats the word skeptically. Turan points out a handprint, explaining that the creature attacked the peddlers and retreated into the forest. He asserts that if they trace its path, they should be able to find it. Azella confesses she can barely manage tracking magic, asking Marvin, who admits he cannot either. Stepping forward, Turan volunteers to locate the beast. Sifting through carriage remnants, Azella questions if he hails from a tracker bloodline. He simply picks up a small piece of cloth, explaining he frequently uses this method and is accustomed to it. Closing his eyes, he inhales the scent before activating a search spell. A glowing blue trail manifests before him. He points toward the forest, leading the group onward. The trail ends at a river, where Turan notes the creature apparently washed its body. Azella scoffs at the idea of a beast intentionally evading detection. Turan suggests it may have simply chosen to wash itself. Suddenly, the blue lines flare again, and Turan warns the group that the beast is behind them. A massive monkey monster with glowing red eyes emerges, roaring, raising massive stones above its head. Knights shout for everyone to dodge. The stones fly with terrifying speed, striking anyone unprepared with severe force. Turan barely evades the first attack, but his shock grows at the sheer destructive power. Azella and Marvin fail to dodge, using nearby knights as shields, causing those knights severe injury. Once the initial assault ceases, Azella tosses aside the knight she had shielded herself with. Turan finally comprehends that his mother's caution was not unfounded. Azella screams for an attack. The remaining able knights charge the monster, yet it suddenly flees. The knights give chase. Meanwhile, Turan readies a small rock in his sling. Azella and Marvin pursue, but the beast's speed overwhelms them. Azella panics, fearing they will lose it. When the rock launches, it flies faster than perception, allowing no reaction, striking the monster straight through as it emits a pained roar. Azella and Marvin glance back to see Turan walking calmly while spinning his sling. He glances upward as the monster screams again.